Hello, welcome back to Unveiling University. My name is Carly Philbrook, and I'm a third-year secondary education major at the University of Maine in Orono. Today, we are going to be covering how to take effective notes during class. Let's get started with what the internet has to say before I share my experiences. And right before we jump in, I just want to let you know that all of the websites that I looked at will be linked in the description below if you want to take a deeper dive. So, with the research, one key area of having effective notes is organization. The research suggests that you keep your notes for different classes separate and keep all your notes together and in chronological order for each class. Another key aspect of note-taking is doing a preview. This can mean looking over your previous class's notes so you kind of have a little bit of context. It also means completing any readings to get an idea of the main concepts of this lecture's topic, and you can also reference your syllabus if possible for the topic of the lecture. This kind of gets you in the right headspace so that you're ready to take notes and you have an idea of what you need to pay attention to. Now, during class, you need to try and write down the main ideas rather than a word-for-word transcript of the lecture if it is more conceptual, big idea kind of class and lecture. But if it is a really factual lecture where you need to know all the specifics, you can try your best to transcribe it verbatim. You also should attempt to keep your notes organized in a consistent structure and use abbreviations and shorter phrases rather than writing out full, complete sentences because it'll be quicker while getting the same ideas down. And also writing your thoughts and questions to keep active. And a key thing is telling what is important in the lecture. A lot of times the introductory and final remarks will be summaries of important information. Repeated info is really important to write down. There are some signal phrases, such as like the main ideas, or in summary, the 4 major events, or whatever. Those kind of things you're definitely going to want to take note of. These kind of phrases can be joined with nonverbal cues, such as pointing or emphasizing in the voice. So now that we've gotten through class and taken our notes, after class, we should be going back and reviewing them. We should be filling in the gaps, clarifying and defining, organizing it a little bit more, especially if you're taking digital notes. It should be easier that you can copy and paste things in a better order and structure. You also should figure out what you missed and what confusions you still have that you should add onto, look into, or ask your professor at maybe office hours or the next class. All of these things should be done in an immediate review for 5 to 15 minutes within the same day. Maybe it's going to be a few hours later because you have classes back to back. That's all right. And this will help you remember the material for a longer amount of time rather than just, quickly writing it down. Now, there are a lot of different formats out there for taking different notes. And it's really all about individual preference and the goal of the notes. If you're trying to have it ready to review when you're looking at the test, or if you're trying to use the information to come up with an essay topic, those are going to require different formats of notes will be more helpful. According to Cornell, handwritten is more effective than typed, but it is, once again, personal preference. So, one big format that's rather common and what I would consider typical are outline notes. So these notes, you just write down the main points and you indent like smaller ideas under each of the main points. And that indented information could include examples and specific details. You might use these because it's something you're already familiar with. I know that's how I've always taken notes. They're also structured and can help show connections between the material. You might not want to use it if your lecturer is kind of just going everywhere and the lecture's not well structured, because that way your notes can quickly become a mess. It's also not a very active way to take notes. You're kind of just writing the facts as they come and you're not really thinking about what you're writing, you're just writing it down. Another method that you've probably heard of is Cornell notes. These notes have 3 sections. There's 2 big columns, one for notes and one for cues, and then at the bottom there's a section for a summary. During class, you're going to fill out the notes section with important concepts and details from the lecture. The cues section is for your questions, and it can also be used to help organize, like maybe putting like headers and pointing arrows at really important things, and also for reminders, like maybe there's a section that you're like, I need to go talk to her about your professor about this, so you put like office hours right next to it or something. So this column is traditionally in the use that the creator, his idea was that it would be used shortly after class during part of your review of your notes, but it can also be used for questions during class as well. The final section is the summary, which is also, the idea is for it to be done after class as part of a review. And this summary should be a sentence or 2 describing the big picture of the lecture. And yeah, as I said, it should be completed after class, but preferably on the same day. So why would we use these notes? There's a lot going on, but this format, because of all the things that are going on, it allows you to take specific notes, but also to look at the big picture and keep your brain active. It's beneficial because reviewing your notes is built in as part of the system. And the summary can also be really great for reviewing before your next lecture. You may not want to use these because it's a fair bit of work. You have to learn how to use them, you have to prep your page, you have to do the review part, all that takes time. There also might feel like there's limited space in the notes column, and you don't always really get to see the connections between the material. So our next format is a concept map. I never really heard of this being used in an actual like lecture setting. I've had to make them, but more as a study kind of thing. So concept maps are going to be diagrams, often flowcharts that expose the relationships between concepts in a really visual way. To use it, you're going to usually start with one big main idea in the middle or sometimes at the top. And you use arrows and maybe a few words to connect it to other big ideas and show the relationships between them. So as I mentioned, you can do it during class, but you can also turn your other notes, if you just take a more typical style of notes, you can turn it into a concept map as part of your review time. So you might want to use these because it allows you to see the big picture and all the connections, meaning it's a good memory tool. But and seeing those connections can be really powerful for visual learners. But you're going to have to think a lot during the lecture in order to use them. Think about all the connections and which pieces should be connected to what and how they're connected. And because there might be a lot of ideas covered in the lecture, it can get messy. And also looking back, you might be like, why are these connected? And what is this word even? Because there's not really a lot of room for specific details, meaning that it can become quite vague. Another method is called the charting method. You set up the page in columns with main topics as headers, and as the lecture goes on, you place the information in the correct column. You can use this because it allows for less writing and more structure. It's also a more visual style, again, that can help compare and recognize patterns across the categories. A con is that it takes time to set up, you can run out of space in the columns, and it's super structured, so some information might be hard to fit into this format. Our final method that we're going to talk about is called the sentence method. So every time that a new idea is mentioned, you write it down on the next line, and you can number each line if you want to. So you're just going to have a ton of like sentences just going down the page for each line. You might use this because there's no prep work. It can be easy for fast lectures when a ton of details are just coming right at you and you don't have time to organize those details. And you can pretty much always use it in any setting. But it's not really necessarily the best style because there's no connections made between the material, there's no organization within the material, it can be hard to identify what the main concepts are, and all of these things add up to mean that it's not very helpful for review. So, I mean, if you maybe immediately afterwards changed it into perhaps a concept map, maybe the sentence method would be more helpful for review in that case. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of the research that's out there, of course, there's a lot more methods and a lot more research out there that you can dive into if you have the time and the desire. I hope that this was a nice quick rundown of some of the things that you can do. And if there is a method you'd like me to look into, please let me know in the comments. But now we're going to move on to my experience. What I do is I pretty much only take handwritten notes, and I do it in the outline style because it's just the simplest, fastest way for me. But I do recognize that it's probably not the most effective, especially because I tend to write down a lot of things more verbatim without really summarizing and paraphrasing in my own words. And I rarely review my notes after class, putting in those questions and summarizing and filling in the gaps. I don't really do all of that unless the only time I really look back at my notes is if I'm looking for specific information because I'm, stuck on a math problem or I'm trying to write an essay. Despite my kind of lackluster note-taking skills, I've done fine in college, so if your note-taking isn't the greatest, remember it's not the end of the world. But I do think I want to try some new things. I'm thinking about trying Cornell Notes because the notes section seems like I could do pretty similar stuff that I'm already doing. And I think that taking that time to, think of questions and connections and summarizing my notes, I think that will really help me get the most out of them. I would consider trying the concept mapping as well. I think it's interesting trying to see all those connections, but I'm not sure if it will make sense for my classes this semester because I'm mostly taking math classes, but we'll see. Yeah. I do want to add one more note about note-taking before we review what we've talked about today. You can often find apps online that will transcribe lectures for you if you really struggle to take notes in class. And some universities will also provide note takers for a class if you submit that you need an accommodation. And so how it works at UMaine is everybody in the class is sent out an email asking if they want to take notes, and then they submit notes within. Whoever gets chosen submits notes within the 24 hours of the class for students who would like to see other people's notes and need an accommodation for that. Okay, so to review, it's really your choice what style of notes you use. But you should always remember that notes are much more valuable when they are reviewed and summarized. Feel free to leave a comment below about your note-taking method or tell us which method you are most excited to try. Thanks for watching us unveil University every step of the way.